I'll be recording everything. For me, it's really more about the output. If you do the assignment, that means you watch the videos or you had your friends to talk to you about what happened in the class, and then you read the modules, and then you did the output. Okay. So again, we'll be talking about infrastructure tonight. So the first sort of piece of infrastructure, or in this case, just a structure, are the buildings themselves. So this is Lincoln, I think the suburb of Lincoln in London. So it's Lincoln, comma London, in the UK. So when you think of urban design, I would use, or when I think of urban design, I usually think of streets and public space. And some of the best urban design, whether we like it or not, is really abroad because it was well maintained. And for the most part, it's good urban design because it was created or constructed during a time when the primary mode of primary mode of getting around was walking. Most urban designers and professionals would agree that the sort of turn of the century, 1900s, up until today, the city development has been very much lacking when you compare it to the medieval cities, the ancient cities, because we are sort of kind of very much dependent on the private car or the private vehicle. And although this like gave a lot of benefits, like in the first 100 years from 1900 to like 1999, the negative impacts have become more and more prevalent. So we see like CO2 emissions, traffic congestions, etc., etc. So the thrust now of urban design, like globally, is to sort of bring city development into a more compact, more walkable scale. So this is an example of that. So what you see here, not aside from like the decently sized sidewalk that's maybe about like 1.5, notice also in quote unquote ideal urban design, the buildings have similar building height, not the same, but similar. It's almost like the facade of the buildings and the heights of the buildings are sort of regulated, not designed, but regulated. So the goal of urban designers and also related to this urban planners is to designate the building heights, the setback from the sort of public infrastructure, the streets and the roads, to make a sort of unified look or give a character to a district, a local government unit, or any kind of other area. So this is the sort of the target for most of the kind of developed countries today. So sort of bringing it back, making it more compact, making it more sort of idyllic. But as we discussed before, the world is becoming more and more urbanized. So we will still have the tall skyscrapers because it's just more economically viable to have everyone in a smaller space. And of course, buildings can only go up. So this sort of kind of homey or like a rural, almost rural type of setting is not possible all the time. So we have to live with the fact that some of our urban areas look like this. So this is still not bad. We can still make this work. In fact, I think this is one of the more popular urban districts, urban areas. This is Shibuya in Japan. And most notably in like a lot of like media, movies, TV, etc. This is their famous sort of Shibuya crosswalk where there's like hundreds, maybe even thousands of people crossing at the same time. It's not kanang quiet or like as idyllic as the sort of previous image here, but it's also kanang very functional, and it's in its own way also very kanang aesthetically pleasing or very like beautiful as well. And then it's all about making sure all the different systems work. So the sidewalks, the what do you call this? The roads, the traffic lights, the signages, they're all working together so people can move across this very like wide thoroughfare safely and in a kanang timely manner. So it's comfortable, it's safe. Everyone knows, all the drivers know to slow down in this area and give priority to the pedestrians. And why should we give priority to the pedestrians? Because they're the ones sort of working in this area. They're sort of coming in from the residential areas to this commercial district. They're the ones who sort of buying the products. They're also the ones selling the products. So it creates making it easier for pedestrians to move around. Just makes the place more competitive and more sort of economically vibrant. So it's not just a aesthetics thing; it's also a very functional thing. So the challenge now is in the Philippines is how do we sort of organize and plan this very complex group of systems which exists in our different sort of cities and localities. So over here, this is a stock image of somewhere in Manila. I don't know. We have sort of the island over here, like a road island to separate two flows of traffic. We still have a lot of pedestrians, which kind of just go anywhere they want, depending on the speed of the traffic flow. We have street vendors. We have the sort of building height over here. It's almost kind of uniform on one side, but on the other side, it's not regulated. We have like looks like a 10-story structure next to a 5-story structure. So it's going up and down, in and out, no uniformity. Our electrical poles are jutting out, wires hanging. So there is no sort of order, unlike the previous images. So this is like quiet urban. This is kind of loud urban, like urban core, city center, CBD kind of design. And here it's the Philippines, for lack of a better term. So I've read your answers. So yeah, you pointed out several good sort of points in both the sustainability and the processes quiz. I like how some people really highlighted that urban design, or like what I discussed, is still very much lacking. There's still so much more to discuss, and I'm glad you picked up on that. And in the sustainability quiz, I'm glad that everyone understands the different systems and how we can make it work together. So I would just like to ask the class, let me see, am I sharing my screen? Yes, I am sharing the screen. In this image, what kinds of systems do you think are present? You can say like in terms of physical, economic, and social, but you can also say like electric poles. You can say like what's going on here in the street, what's going on here is the drivers. What do you see? Anyone from the class? Hello? What do you see in this image? Or basically, kanang, what is this image better than this image or worse? Is it better than this image or is it worse? Or yes, go ahead.
Yeah, worst.
Worst. Okay, why
Crowded.
worst? So what's wrong with this image?
No regulation. Uh,
Mm,
Anywhere gusto nila nga mo display og something, mahimo nila
mm,
without any kuan guidelines. Ang ara sila nga
like
park.
guidelines,
Yes,
no rules. Mm,
pedestrians walking all around, wala na kuan asa ang pedestrian walk.
mm. Very good. Okay. Anyone else? So it's sorry, kasi ito nag-storya.
Catherine, sir.
Catherine, okay, thank you, Catherine. Sir, I can't see the screen, Mangod, with this because I'm sharing my screen. I'll just note here. Okay, thank you, Catherine. Okay. Oh, sorry. Anyone else? I think everyone else feels the same way. Yes, go ahead.
I think,
Who's
sir, yung
speaking?
sa may, not just the pedestrian, but also some part of the road din kasi ginagawang parking space. So,
Hmm. You see it
yun,
over here.
nag-create siya ng congestion talaga in traffic.
Mm. Okay. Who's speaking?
Crystal, sir. I think,
Okay,
sir,
thank
this
you,
one
Crystal.
is Hispania. So, I don't know, kasi itong sa my left, right side, I think that's arcaded na
Yeah,
building.
I think this is arcaded, which makes it even more confusing. Why are these people on the street?
Yes, that's it, sir. Pero if this is somewhere in Hispania or probably in Recto, these arcaded spaces po kasi maraming nagbibenta dyan ng mga books.
Ah, okay. It
Illegal.
becomes a selling area.
Oo, so parang ano, may mga vendors diyan. So minsan hindi dumadaan yung tao diyan kasi
Mm,
it's either uh, i-offeran ka
crowded.
nila to baka gusto mo ng fake license or birth certificate, gano'n.
Ah, okay, very real. I've been
Based
to
on
those.
experience, sir.
Okay, maybe we'll take one more. I would like to go through maybe five students if possible. Another question I'd like to ask is, which place do you prefer to live in? Do you want to live in here, or do you want to live here, or are you happy with this? Sige. Anyone else? Yeah, maybe. Okay, maybe nag warm up pa. Okay. For me, I would, what do you call this? Um, Between one and two, I prefer to live like in a city center like this because I need fast internet. Because I'm afraid if I live here, hinayang internet. And now we have to sort of figure this out. So maybe we can transform it to some areas will definitely need to look like this, like Shibuya, but some areas also need to look like this, like Lincoln, where the more outskirts, more urban periphery also needs to be organized. So I think the main problem with the Philippines is that all our spaces are kind of trying to be both rural and urban at the same time because we're in this like transition period where nothing is yet kind of solidified or kind of organized yet. So it's all about kind of organizing and designing. Okay, so these first three images are basically using the buildings and the structures in terms of design as the background. So the foreground, meaning like the space where people you see a lot of people moving, is really the streets and the roads. So same here, and to extent same here. So our buildings, because sometimes a lot of us are architects, we think our buildings should be always the standout of the space. But for the most part, for the greater good of the community, sometimes it's better to have our buildings sort of fade into the background or follow regulations so that our space will become more uniform and sort of more kanang visually pleasing. Similar to this, it doesn't have to be the same height, it doesn't have to be the same color, but mostly similar enough so that this space has a character. So you see this character very clear, very like UK, London looking place. This is Japan, but this could be any CBD in the entire world. Like it's very clean, very kanang general sidewalks. And here, this can be any place in the Philippines, but as we mentioned before, there's a lot of problems with this. Okay, now here, this is a Google Maps image of the Cathedral of the Pisa complex. So as architects, this is the dream project where we have our buildings displayed for the whole public. And this is something na I think a lot of us can relate to, that sometimes when we have our major building or major project, it's covered by so many other buildings that you can't see it. So this is sort of the other function of buildings in urban design. So before, this was the buildings as the backdrop, and here the buildings as the sort of the centerpiece, or the what do you call that? The foreground of the urban design. So this is a whole complex. You have the Leaning Tower here, the Cathedral of Pisa, the sort of dome or the bell. I think I forgot, baptistry. It's the baptistry. The Leaning Tower is supposed to be like a bell tower, which leaned because of like a weak soil foundation. And then the Campo Santo, which is I think the kanang cemetery of this whole kanang religious site. So notice in this area, the Italian government, is it, where's Pisa? I just think somewhere in Rome or maybe Florence. The local government made sure that their main structures, nothing is obstructing the view of their main structure. So no trees, it's just plain vegetation. The buildings around it also are designed in a way, or like regulated in a way, that it's not taller than the main structures. And then this is another view of Cebu, where we have sort of important historical structures, but they sort of blend into the background because the building constructions around it, or the buildings developed around it, are not regulated. So here we have Magellan's Cross. It's a very small kiosk. I'll show you an image later on. And around it, at least it's like there's a park, like a small park area, but it's also like a parking space. And I think it looks better because before there used to be a driveway that really goes across Magellan's Cross. But now I think it's a lot better. We have some of the oldest churches in Cebu, Basilica del Santo Niño, which is sort of covered by contemporary buildings around it. So if you were driving here on P. Burgos Street here on the middle of the image, and these other streets here to the left side of the image, you wouldn't know there's a historical building there. Whereas in Pisa, you can see the Leaning Tower are probably like from hundreds of meters away, because all the buildings are sort of regulated to kind of highlight this like important heritage site. So this is another issue in the Philippines where we don't highlight our heritage sites. I think I should have also, oh, I didn't show, but I was looking at Intramuros. Let's look at Intramuros together. So it's not very Cebu-centric. Intramuros. Basically, I think the oldest or the largest, one of the oldest and the largest historical sites in the Philippines. It's a preserved sort of like Spanish fort, probably like almost 1500s, maybe 1600s type design. I think 1600s because it has a moat. Moats were introduced like 16 or 1700, something like that. Okay, and you would expect that this very important heritage site can be seen, let's say, from outside. But what happens is that for those in Manila, I think you already know, you can't even see the fort from outside because it's covered. There are no tall buildings. I think this is just a kind of communication error with the landscape architects and the heritage architects. Now, you can't see it. You don't even know it's there. And also, one of the other problems is that around the heritage site is a golf course. So it becomes like a private, semi-private area where visitors can come into Intramuros through one of these roads here. Maybe this one, Seriano Drive. But the perimeter of the heritage site has become a private space, like golfers. Maybe that's also the only way to fund the heritage efforts, where they basically just have to have the golf course here because the people who play golf are the ones paying for the conservation efforts. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on Intramuros. But it's so kanang sayang bitaw. Now you have this piece of heritage and it's not even on display. It's covered, it's hidden, and you really have to go through this road here before you can actually see it. So now we're inside Intramuros, one of the more kanang what do you call this? I guess more visited sites. So we have like a preserved building here. Let's look at the quality of the streets. Sidewalks are present. There's a little bit more order, mostly because this is a heritage site. You see it's a little bit cleaner, not so much, no problems with traffic. You have here a very kanang nice view towards this. I'm not sure what this building is, but it really takes a lot of effort for things to or like urban design to be like preserved or have a purpose. Like this is still inside Intramuros, one of the sort of lesser known back alleys, I guess, because there's like not much going on, or it's like it's a bit messier than the front area. So this whole thing is the Intramuros complex, and it's sayang lang to me that it's not on display as much as other countries would have done. So in urban design, if we have heritage sites, we want to display them. And contemporary buildings, because we're urban designers and not architects, we want to really highlight the public space, the streets, the roads, etc. And the building should be more the background. Okay. So going on to like thoroughfares or like public infrastructure. So I would divide roads over here on the upper left, not roads, sorry, streets on the upper left and roads here on the upper right. So the main difference is streets are for people. So they include sidewalks, maybe planter strips, and a small section of driveway, but usually nothing more than 4 lanes. a road is specifically for cars. So you can have 4 lanes, 6 lanes, 8 lanes, but this area is meant for high speed traffic. So number one is it's not safe for people to be anywhere near cars going beyond like 50 kilometers per hour, 60 kilometers per hour. So dividing that sort of driving speed into specifically roads and specifically streets makes for better sort of urban design. So if you limit what they call the speeds here in the streets, you can allow people to sort of join in, use the sidewalks, and the sidewalks become safer because the speed of the cars are limited to like maybe 30 kilometers per hour. So why 30 kilometers per hour? According to experts, that's the maximum speed of a car that you can survive getting hit by. So if a car is going 30 kilometers per hour and it hits you, you should survive minor injuries. If they go 35 or 40, you get like major injuries. If it's going 50 to 60, most likely like death. So the idea is whenever we have people, we put them on streets, and whenever there are streets, the speed limit for cars should be like between 30 to 40 maximum. And then this really asks a question. So urban cores, there's a lot of people there and people want to drive. So which one do we serve? So ideally, in urban cores, like areas like this here, the priority should be the pedestrians because as you can see, there's more of them than there are cars, and really don't want anyone getting hit by cars here. So depending on your area, maybe it's the opposite. But for like CBD's urban cores internationally, the priority are really the pedestrians. So more streets in urban cores. In sort of like more rural areas, that's where you have the highways, basically where there's nothing going on, no like commercial buildings. It's just used as a sort of a thoroughfare to get from like maybe one city to another city. And for me, the bridge is also the same thing. So it transports vehicles. Nobody will be walking along a bridge. Maybe some will, but it's not advised, or it's not something a lot of people will do like normally. I think even in the Philippines, the bridges we have are really meant for cars. And I think it's good to keep them for cars because it's like what will people do along the bridge? There's no activities that can be supported on a bridge. On a street, however, they can be located near existing buildings. Those buildings can have shops, restaurants, eateries. So they become more spaces for gathering and not just spaces for like moving around. And this sort of gathering and activity, social activities really help make the city a better place to live in. It makes it more safe. And I think the reason why we have our fixers here, those who make birth certificates, fake passport, etc. They hang around here to arcades because it's like away from the public view. It's dark, and what do you call this? So spaces that are not very visible to the public become more spaces for like criminal activity. So our goal as urban designers is to open things up to the public so they become more safe and reduce like criminal activity, etc., etc. And that doesn't mean that we remove cars entirely. Cars have their own place as well. So I'll discuss this further in the next presentation after this. So you see the movement for more bicycle lanes, more sidewalks. It's really not about kind of removing cars, but it's about providing more options for our citizens. So if more people can move around in the city safely, there will be more economic activity, less crime because spaces are more kind of public, because crimes only happen where people can't see. So ideally, that's like the long-term goal, or like the big picture idea of why we want more people in our public spaces. And then over here on the right side, we see diagrams. These are US diagrams because they're using feet. What can you do with 6 feet? About like, I think 3 meters, right? 6 feet, about 3 meters. You can have sort of a way, let me just double check. Dugay na ko convert og feet to inch to meters. 6 feet, 2 meters. Oh, 1.8. I was very off. So 1.8 lang. You can have space for one person, a lamp or electrical post, and a car parking on the curb. You can also have like a curb extension where there's like a tree creating this sort of divider for the kanang sidewalk traffic and the vehicle traffic. And then you have on the third option here, kanang space for people walking and also some 1 foot planting strip beside the building. So this is just a way to introduce more greenery, more vegetation inside urban areas, because as we saw here, most of the vegetation is in the middle of the street. Really, the people can't enjoy the benefits of like having plants there. Where in like places like Shibuya or developed countries, the trees are both in the middle of the street and also on the sidewalk itself, so people can enjoy the benefits of these like natural vegetation. So that also falls in line with our discussion on sustainability or modules on sustainability, where we can put more green spaces inside our urban areas. Okay, so next is this is a more infrastructure, more kind of engineering based, but we need also to develop our deep wells, our water reservoirs, and this is just a diagram of how those work. So for those who are not aware, so deep wells, there are two types. There's deep and shallow. I think the difference is how basically how deep the the well is. So I think, let's see, above ground pipes, no freeze protection. It doesn't say the dimension, but if you have like a sanitary engineer or a kind of plumbing engineer, they would give you like the actual dimensions. Connected, both of the wells are connected to a jet pump to extract the water, and it's stored in a storage tank and then pumped into water filters for usage in residential areas. Okay, and the next thing is wastewater. So again, I'm not a sanitary engineer, but I think we all get the idea that raw sewage is processed, clean, and after the cleaning process, so there's the primary treatment and the secondary treatment. It can be used for other sources like watering plants, maybe for gray water, like what they call flushing, etc., etc. And then maybe even reuse as drinking water, but that will require more treatment. And sort of these infrastructure need space. So a city is not only just the buildings and the thoroughfares, the streets and roads, but like providing, as we mentioned last week or last week, providing ways to like get our natural resources like water, and then as on the next slide here, power. So napay-pakapin na reservoir as part of the sort of the water supply. And then this is just, I put them together because sometimes we can use man-made structures like dams to harvest electricity from our reservoirs or bodies of water. So in a sort of street section down here on the lower left, we have our street trees, we have the sidewalks, the roads, maybe even a future light rail line, and we also have like lamps, lights. But one thing we don't see so much in developed countries is the electric pole. So this is one of probably the bigger challenges in urban design in the Philippines, because we rely so much on electric poles. And as we saw in the first image, not the first image, this image here, they tend to become very messy very fast. Like after like several, like maybe 10 years, they become almost unrecognizable, where they have several wires now hanging, and it requires a lot of maintenance. This is not so much an urban design issue as it is an engineering issue, but this is something that we need to be aware of. And me personally, I don't know how we're going to fix it, because I'm not an expert in power supply or electrical engineering. I'm sure there's a reason why all the wires are the way they are. I just don't know why. I just hope that we as future urban designers can work together with our local power suppliers sort of to find a way to clean up the dangling wires, because I'm sure those things are not safe. And then finally, the physical waste. What do we do with them? This is a popular sort of a thesis proposal in the University of San Carlos, so I just like wanted to discuss this as well. There's a lot of potential in our landfills, especially in Manila. I think has one of the largest landfills like in the whole world. Apparently, Once an object decomposes, they create gas, and we can harvest that gas for fuel. I don't know how that process really works, but this could be also an option for like urban design proposals, because some of these landfills, especially in the Philippines, are very large, and they're almost as big as one town or like one community. And then if we need to, what they call this, we really need to manage them, because sometimes, especially like in Manila, I think it's Smoky Mountain 1 and 2, the sort of decomposing materials have been there for so long, like several decades now. It's becoming part of the natural landscape, where they call it Smoky Mountain because it looks like an actual mountain. I wish I had an image here. So that's another sort of area where urban design could be used to make better sort of landfills and resource recovery facilities. And then after all of that, we also have the public spaces, where the Philippines is kind of lacking. One of the major public space that you can see in these like ancient like cities like Rome, let's see, medieval cities like in Europe, are the plazas, or sometimes they're called squares. So these are very open public space, but not too large. The limit is about 150 or 180 meters on the longer side. And anything larger, it becomes like, you don't call it a plaza anymore. You call it like a park, or basically park. So when I say plazas, I mean public space about 150 to 180 on both sides. Sometimes they come in ellipses, sometimes they're like completely rectangular, sometimes they're square. But mostly the purpose of plazas, according to a little book called Urban Design, Street and Square, is to highlight the beauty of the city. So here, this is St. Peter's Square. And the purpose of this is to highlight St. Peter's Basilica, which we're standing on. So this is the view on top of the Basilica. And this sort of boulevard here, again, sort of highlights the Basilica at the end. So the purpose is really to make the city look more beautiful. So, but at the same time, the function is more like creating a sense of community, and as well as creating like this very interesting, or like very visually appealing vista. And it also promotes tourism. So that's the functional side, but it's more aesthetics and more social and psychological. So without spaces like this, people's perception of cities become very muddled, like they don't know where they are. But landmarks, basically creating landmarks, is the purpose of creating, is also like a side effect or a benefit of having plazas. And of course, we also have public parks. So these parks, as we can see here, this is New York Central Park. On the longer sides, about 4 kilometers. On the shorter sides, about 1 kilometers, maybe 0.8 kilometers, if I remember correctly. So public spaces like parks have a different function from plazas. So the parks is not really there for the city, but it's more for the citizens, like a space for them to relax. And once you're inside the park, it's basically like you're away from the city. This one highlights the buildings around it. Plazas highlights the buildings around it. Parks are sort of other spaces, basically retreats where citizens can relax and basically not think about the city. So people come to like public parks to forget about the city, where here people come to plazas to like celebrate the city. Like, we're all here, we're a community, we're maybe like in this case, we're celebrating mass together. The plazas in the Philippines are very limited. So I don't have much images on that. But we do have some new sort of developments like waterfronts. So this is an esplanade in Iloilo. I think this was recently completed, like 2018, maybe something like that. And then not so much people here yet, because there's really no activities here yet. I think the one way to make this space more active is to have some like kiosks or commercial areas along this space here, so people will want to visit. But it looks very nice. The river is well preserved. Something that isn't really kind of done in very urban areas in the Philippines. So think of Manila, they have the Pasig River. In Cebu, we have several rivers, but they're all pretty much dead now. In Davao, I'm not familiar if they have rivers. I think they should have. But this is really one prime example of Philippine development. And it's more landscaping, but the development of the types of kind of the sidewalk widths, where the landscaping will go, that's very urban design. That's a clear example of urban design. Like where should the steps towards the river be, setbacks from the river. Notice there is no kind of electric posts. It's all underground. You have some lighting over here, and you have a stage area over here. So unfortunately, there's no people on in this image yet, so we don't know if this what do you call this esplanade is as successful as they say. But from what I hear, Iloilo is a very successful city, and I think it's because they have good urban design and urban management. Okay, so we talked about those several infrastructure types. For urban design specifically, we want to focus on streets, plazas, and waterfronts. So in our class, based on like what the my professors taught me, I would classify or define streets as passageways and gathering spaces between buildings. So currently, the popular sort of layman understanding of streets is they're just for walking along. You don't have any activities there. But in the developed countries, they want streets to be occupied. They want like people eating in front of shops. They want mostly people can buy food near street areas, etc. So streets again are different from roads. And then basically the thrust now is to have more people in public spaces. And plazas, as mentioned earlier, mostly for gathering space, but also sometimes like passage space. And here, plazas are used to basically highlight important events or buildings within the city. So creating more spaces where people and citizens of a city can gather and sort of like celebrate their local community. And then finally, waterfronts, basically just streets, but near bodies of water. And then one sort of a resource I use is Urban Design Street and Square, written by Motin in 2003, and also used by my professors, is that it gives the idea that public space should be designed as the forefront or the positive element of the design. And this means that we put our buildings as the background. So here in the image, this left image here, which I will like demo in a bit. The idea is public space should be either like a street positive or plaza positive. What we're trying to do is imagining the space as a three-dimensional block, and we're trying to carve out how the street will look like. Whereas as architects, we're used to thinking of our building as the main element of any like city, and we're creating the building from scratch and placing it there in the public area. So let me show that in a more like a clear way. Or I need to draw for this. I think that's my drawing demo. Okay. Where is my Okay. So many things on my desk. Okay, so I need to open this. If you have any questions about the different elements of the different types of infrastructure, feel free to ask. But I'm just going to demonstrate here what I mean when I say we design street positive places or spaces. Okay, so here's a pen. When we think of any city, let's say I'm just going to draw like a simple city block here. I think of a city, what is I'm in gray mode, smoothing. Yeah, it's on grayscale for some reason. Let me close that. Where's my blending mode gray? Anyway, never mind. Don't know why it's doing that now. Okay, so think of any like street or like city block. So we can think of that as a three-dimensional block. Let's say something like that. And what do we mean by street positive or public space positive is that when we design public space, when we do urban design, we think of the city as this like three-dimensional block, and then we carve out the streets like so. Like example, this is a street. Like that. So we're designing this part here. Because currently, or the popular practice is that we have a series of buildings here, buildings like different heights, buildings on this end, different heights. And our job is to, this is the popular belief, our job is to like create how wide the sidewalk should be, etc., etc. So this one is not the right way. We're trying to think of streets more like this way over here. So this means we're looking at the bigger picture. We're looking at the whole, the community as a whole. Like for example, let's do, I really want color for some reason. Layer mask, their style, swatches, histograms. For some reason, I really can't make it colored. Okay, let's do that. So for example, let's take this one. Okay. Something like that. Save. Sample 1. Excuse me. I think I need to Google how to change Photoshop. Sorry. From grayscale to RGB. Image mode RGB. Here. There we go. Okay. So again, the street positive thinking is that we're designing not just this thoroughfare here, but the spaces around it. So for example, this one here, this one here. We need to think about how this sort of space will be viewed from this point here, this point here, and this point here. So just like thinking about the bigger picture, whereas if someone tells you, please design our street and what do you call this? For example, a subdivision area like this one over here. If someone like, or a government or a client tells you like, well, please design our street here. And then you just do that. You go to the site, you look at the existing street and you see, there's no sidewalk. And you just put sidewalks there. And that's it, that's your job. Where ideally you should also consider what's going on here. What are the building heights? What are the building heights here? Are the building heights similar? So you take a look at this whole thing and you see it as one big block, like so. And then you're designing the street here in the middle. How will this street design impact the buildings around it? So you're not designing just that street, but you're designing, let me change color here, the face of the buildings on this side here in blue, and also the, not really designing, but taking into consideration the faces of the building on the left side here in red. So your street design is not just this part here, but this whole thing, the building heights, what's the treatment on their facades, what's going on the sidewalk, what's going on the doors, what's going on in the middle of the road, and etc. So this whole thing, so it probably look like that. So you consider everything so that this space here where people walk on, where people drive, becomes more sort of connected. So you're trying to design all of this. So this. So that's all part of your design, and not just the flat 2D plane. So public space, streets, plazas, and waterfronts are three-dimensional space. So we have that again. You're designing, I'm just repeating this over and over again so it's clear. You're designing the street, you're giving recommendations for the storefront, like where the door should be, how long should the arcades be, if there are any sort of projections, windows, something like that. You're not designing the building, you're just giving sort of kanang limits, like how much should this distance be, how much should the building heights be, what's inside the building and how the building gets executed, that's up to the architects. For us, it's just the 3D enclosure or the enclosed space, whether it's a street, a plaza, or a waterfront. So that's something that I really just want to clarify. Okay, before I proceed, any questions like on this idea? All good? Claro, ra? I guess no. Silence means yes. So Manisha, so don't think of streets as just like a flat plane or public space, streets, plazas, waterfronts as just a flat plane. Even this esplanade, let me just take a screenshot of this. It's still 7, so we have some time. Control-V. So in this design here, this esplanade, we're considering the, like the, let me change to red. How tall should the trees be in this side here? Like this. How deep do we go down to the river over this side? So there's like an invisible sort of plane that you're designing on, like here. And how does that relate to everything on the inside? So here it's a little bit easier because you just want to preserve, for example, you're a person standing here, you want to preserve views to the river. So you obviously you want the side of your development to slope down towards the river to preserve that view. Over here, you may want taller trees here to like shield your sort of walkway from like noise, any kinds of like distractions. So it becomes a more quieter space. Essentially, another analogy would be, think of the street as a room, and the sort of the sidewalk is your floor, and the vegetation or buildings to the left or to the right, or the body of water to the right, are your walls. So this is a wall, this is a wall, and your ceiling is the sky. So the sky is your ceiling, something like that. Okay, is that clear? Is that any questions about that? Yes, go ahead. Ara? Okay, I'll give you guys like maybe a minute to sort of digest that. So even over here, let me see. You would also consider this space here. I can't really see, but the space beside this, there's supposed to be like developed areas over here. I think this can also count as a wall. And notice that the tree heights here are more or less similar to the tree heights here. So it creates this kind of like, I guess, no other word for like 3D enclosure. You can see the volumes here. That's another wall over there. That's another wall. So something like that. So you're designing a three-dimensional space and not just like a flat line here. So everything sort of around it, and you're just carving out. You're basically sculpting, where you have a sort of a block, and then you're taking away parts that you don't need, and you leave in the sort of the parts that you do need. So here you get a esplanade, so something like that. Okay, I think I've repeated myself over and over again, so hopefully that's clear. Let's proceed to the next part. Okay. Another sort of advantage to designing this way is you think about things like the angle of elevation, like how far do you need to stand in order to see the top and the bottom of a building? Like you see it in one glance, the topmost part of the building and the bottommost part of the building. Apparently, according to Moten, I'll show you the book later, it's called Urban Design, Street and Square. The ideal distance for viewing a building that's about, what do you call this? 3 stories high, maybe 4 stories high, is about 1,500 meters. And the sort of angle of elevation to see the whole building is about 68 degrees. So if you have any important landmark, like a city hall, or if you're doing like a park redevelopment or a plaza redevelopment, and there's an important structure you want to show off, make sure there's space they can see the what do you call this? Maybe a fountain or important structure, and you maintain that 68-degree sight line. So basically, let me just make a new one over here. And so let me see. You have any public space, any open space. You have a person standing over here. The angle of sight is 68 degrees from where they're standing. 68 degrees. And then you just apply that, and then you should be able to see whatever structure is here, whether it be like a building, sculpture, like a water fountain or something like that. If you draw a person, this is about maybe like 1.2, 1,200 mm. They should be able to see the whole sort of structure in one glance. So basically, this is the front of whatever building you have, front. And then you can see that whole thing with your eyeball. If it follows a 68 degree, if you can maintain the 68 degree angle, like from the bottom of the building to the top of the building. Let's just say natural ground line. And the distance is depending on how tall the building is. So the taller the building, the further the distance. Okay. So those are just some quick tips for urban design. Okay, so I mentioned earlier why I wanted to separate streets and roads, and really because streets are for people and roads are for cars. And you need both, sort of the same way that you need both urban and rural areas. Because in the city centers, you would need streets because there's a lot of people, they're going to do shopping, they're going to be moving around the city. So you need spaces for the people, and because people are there, you need to reduce traffic speeds. And when you need to reduce traffic speeds, like I know drivers will be complaining, you can also add like parking. You can also add like intersections. You can, because of the reduced speeds, you can add bicycle lanes. So it becomes a more safe but also more efficient space for transporting not only vehicles but also people. So on a road, I think we all agree that the car is, although convenient, it's good for traveling long distances, but not very good for traveling short distances because you're spending a lot on gas. So if we design our public spaces more efficiently, we can convince more people to like walk, maybe cycle, and reduce the need for vehicles. And this will just free up our CBDs so that more people can move around. But what happens when you need to move from one city to another city? So that's when you need roads. And on these roads, you need to travel fast. So how fast? Like 70 kilometers per hour. I think sometimes even 80 kilometers per hour minimum. And because the vehicles are traveling so fast, you really don't want anybody on the sidewalks. In fact, if you see here the image on the right, there are no sidewalks. So people should not be in anywhere near these kinds of roads because the speeds are uh, so fast that if they accidentally get hit, they're gonna kill someone. So avoid the situation or like minimize accidents altogether by removing people from the equation. So we need both streets and roads. And for me, the determining factor is how fast are the cars moving and how many people are in that area. So if it's a low density area, more likely you need roads. High density area, you need streets. But of course, in urban design, there's a lot of it depends and like mixing, especially in the Philippines. So this is what I would call strode. I saw like one urban designer on YouTube mention this idea, and I really like it because it highlights what's going on in the Philippines. In the Philippines, we neither have streets or and roads. So what we have are stroads. So it's a combination of both, and more. It's basically the best of both worlds, but like the worst of both worlds. So we have high speed traffic and no sidewalks, but yet people still walk around in these areas and it becomes very dangerous. You have electric poles that are like very messy. In fact, in this image, you have a person like fixing electricity here. So this is not very comfortable to drive around. It's also not very comfortable to walk around. You see a lot of like Sika drivers here. It has become a kind of a good spot for like them to pick up passengers. So my solution for these types of areas when it's already very kind of small, and I think for the most part in this area, traffic is already very slow, just convert it into a proper street. So additional sidewalks, maybe even reduce the roadway a little bit so that you can have something more like this. And I think this is really what this area needs, like more places for, because the Sikas are already there, might as well design for them instead of like removing them, working with what's already existing. Remember, that's what we discussed with like the physical systems, like reusing and recycling what's already there so we can reduce on resources and make the most of what we have. So we already have some spaces here for the sidewalk. I think local government, basically this is a Barangay Talamban where I'm from. Maybe I can talk to local government in the next few years, maybe have like a sidewalk here. I would like to really clean up this electric post here and maybe just provide like a proper waiting area for these tricycle or like motorcycle drivers so they're not crowding in one side. Notice how they're using the shade of the existing building. And I think this is a strength of the Filipinos. We're very good at adapting to what's already existing. As urban designers in the Philippines, it's our job to like find out what's working in this space. For me, what I see is there's already good access to public transportation here. We don't need to like remove that. In fact, we can reinforce that. What's not working is like the mess. You have like MCWD pipes here, which need to be like protected. You have trash that needs to be cleaned. And I think you also have like this very kind of annoying sort of blind turn, like here where my mouse is. There's traffic incoming from the left side, and there's like to go into the city to the University of San Carlos, I need to go here on the right side. And sometimes cars here can't see me coming. So everyone in this area already knows to drive slow because you can't see if there are cars coming. So my solution to that would be set back or like buy this portion of property here, maybe with government money, so we can set back a bit so we can see if there's incoming traffic or not. And of course, clean up that electric post there. And then hopefully that will make the space even better than it is. And we can apply these like small changes everywhere in the Philippines. Big projects require a lot of money, but we can also start with small projects that don't require a lot of resources. And maybe once the Sika drivers are becoming more and more comfortable, they have like proper spaces, it'll be less congested, they can work better, more people will be able to access their services, and maybe in the long run, it will be better for everyone. Okay, so I mentioned this, that there are standards for street design. Mostly I use Urban Design Street and Square here for my classes. It's from 2003. But recently, I found out about the Urban Street Design Guide. These books or guides are published by the National Association of City Transport Officials. They're based in New York. And they also printed several guides for like bikeway design, transit street design, if you're interested, like in like railways, light rail, maybe like big public transportation services. We have the street design manual. This is it. And the global street design manual, like a more sort of a worldwide view of what's going on in street design. In this class, I just used the New York one, but it's also available online. Actually, I can share with you the links. So I think I have it here. Let me just close this. I should have it here. Here. So you can browse through this in your spare time, see what catches your eye, but I'll just give you a brief overview of some of the principles in both books. In Moten's book, The Urban Design, Street and Square, they talk about street length, street proportion, and unity. So there's this idea that 1:3 ratio is generally effective, meaning one building height or one unit of height to 3 units of width. So you can have a road and a sidewalk. Large squares or very large streets kind of remove the human element and makes the space very like unhospitable and intimidating, where I think most urban designers would agree that a 1:3 ratio is generally effective for like urban areas. And for more rural areas, you can go wider, meaning there's not many like buildings to create that sense of enclosure here. So again, a sense of enclosure is achieved when the human scale is sort of like considered in the design, where a street is not too wide and also not too narrow. So I'll show you what I mean over here. So this is an image of Paris showing their sort of Royal Opera House over here. So Moten would really look at more of the visual elements of urban design. And just for context, let me bring up Google Maps over here. Paris Royal Opera House. So the argument is that because the Royal Opera House is a significant structure, good urban design would highlight this very like notable piece of architecture. So if you look at the street design in this image, the proportion is as follows. Let me just draw over it. So it's about maybe 1:4. Let me just make a 45-degree angle. No, it's exactly 1:3 proportion. So 3 units of width and 1 unit of height. And at this level, you can see that the Opera House, our like main element for this district, or like the star of this area, has more or less the same building height as the buildings around it. So it's not overshadowed, it's not hidden. But the issue that Moten in Urban Design, Street and Square likes to point out, that if street length is too long, you'll end up with a view like this. Let me move out even further. Like that, where it looks like, you can still see the Opera House. And I'll just zoom out a bit, like let's say, measure that distance, and let's go here, like the end of this street. I don't know what this street is called. But if a street becomes too long, basically your star element of the design, I can't go down while the measurement is on. Doesn't seem to be working. Hang on. Just go back. Paris Royal Opera House. I think I didn't click the maps function. Okay, here we go. If I go down over here, notice that you can't even see the Opera House anymore. Like it's no longer like a feature of the design, like of the public space. It becomes like a footnote instead of the main star of the design, or the streetscape. So notice how it's very small over here. And that's what Moten is trying to show us. Moten, the author of Urban Design, Street and Square. that if your street is too long, you lose that sense of sort of a character where you want to highlight this building, but because the street is so long, it becomes lost in the background. So the ideal solution to this would be to have an intermediate street here, and maybe instead of like just having this like a bare space, there could be like a fountain here or some kind of other landmark, sort of to help with the wayfinding. And imageability is another term in urban design. So basically the goal of this book here, Urban Design Street and Square, is to tell you designers what are the different techniques to make your public spaces more memorable. So really one of the techniques is really to make sure your landmarks are very visible. Another sort of discussion here is what happens when your streets are too narrow. So generally, this is very if depends kind of situation, because sometimes there are some benefits to having very narrow streets. Like for example, this is a street in the shambles of York County or York City in the UK. Because the buildings are so close to each other, you don't need a lot of kanang roof eaves, because geographically the UK doesn't get a lot of sun. So just having these like buildings close enough like this provides a lot of shade for the pedestrians inside. So you have the buildings on the right providing this line of shade in blue, the buildings on the left providing this line of shade in the left. So going back to my example here in the Philippines, is that sometimes maybe we need narrow streets as well, but really again it depends on context. So whether you want wide streets or narrow streets, it depends on your street design context. So if you're in a low density area, for example like this here in the image, what do you call this, the urban design street standard calls this a commercial street, where you have a single corridor, not much buildings, and mostly just like a sort of a transportation or like a transit zone. So at the right, we have a roadway through an auto-oriented commercial zone, but has the same road right of way as the two streets below, so over here. So if we get like more people in an area, basically it's trying to say that this road right of way is the same over here. We should be considering like more vegetation, more sidewalks, because there are people. If there are no people, no problem. Like we can have designs like this everywhere. But the issue, again, as I brought up 2 weeks ago, is that there are more and more people living in urban areas. So we need to design for them so that they can move around in our different cities and be able to like not only access goods and services, but also provide their own goods and services. They can work, they can earn money, they can pay taxes, and those taxes ideally should be used to further develop our like urban spaces and improve the quality of life, etc., etc. So once we have people in an area, we need to start designing for them. So maybe add like planting strips over here, definitely add sidewalks, and reduce the speeds of cars in those areas, again, for safety. Then we have the high density areas, the downtown streets. So the thrust now, as I mentioned before, is to provide as many modes of transportation as possible. So you have public buses, you have private cars, you have cycling lanes, you have sidewalks, you have intersections, and all of this designed to make it as universally accessible as possible. So you have people who are sort of nearsighted or have sight impairment, people on wheelchairs should also be able to move around in these areas. It's a bit of a, what they call this, optimistic view, but that's really what designers are good at, I think. Like we entered into this profession because we like putting our ideas on paper, we like seeing them built and realized. So why not use those talents to create sort of better urban environments? So we always think of what could be the best, always what the best could be, and not just what is currently there. So I think that will your success in this field really is like, how optimistic can you be after like several years of practice? Can you say that you're as optimistic as you were like in college, something like that? But yeah, I feel like optimism is very much kanang needed for urban development to happen. And what kind of urban design really depends on the site context. So I think most of us are architects, we're aware of this, but the engineers, the businessmen, the accountants, those who hold all the money, they don't understand this. So it's our goal to sort of tell them that these kinds of differences exist, and the different kinds of interventions really depend on where is the project happening. Is it in a high density area, medium density area, or a low density area? Okay, so again, talking about what's possible in our different cities. Recall our image of that image in Manila, where there's no order, there's parking everywhere, there's people walking around everywhere. So what they need is some kind of order, some kind of intervention, and you can do something like this down here. Although not exactly, but these are the possible sort of solutions, like inviting street activity. So I think we already have plenty of that. It's like more regulating the street activity. Changing the street geometry, so increasing the sidewalks, create cycle facilities. I think cycling is really here to stay, and just we need to be prepared. Our cities also need cycling paths or bicycle lanes. Add seating along the sidewalk. So this is an issue in the Philippines where government officials and maybe some even private homeowners are afraid of putting benches in front of their houses because they'll invite squatters, blah, blah, blah. But it's a transitionary, it's a process. Maybe in the beginning there'll be squatters there, but eventually they're mostly just kind of people who want, or like, what they call this, the people we want to sit there will be able to sit there, like customers, maybe like workers nearby. And if they're happy, they can work better. And if they work better, everyone wins. Like we get more services and goods. And like we hopefully that money generated from that goes back to us, like to improve our infrastructure. Okay, we have add or remove pedestrian crossings. We can add more efficient lighting. I think that's also like more engineering than urban design. We have improved traffic signals, enhanced traffic enforcement. In Sydney, like most major sort of highways have cameras to record traffic violators. And if you violate a traffic code, during the day or maybe the next day, you'll get a mail and then just a picture of your car running a red light or turning where it's not supposed to turn. So that's way off into the future for the Philippines. But this is just like kind of basically dreaming about what's possible. What can we do? What kind of designs can we make? Organizing transit here, like I think one goal of like Filipinos is to have a proper bus stop everywhere. That could be something that we can design. Integrating public artwork. So we have a lot of creatives in the Philippines. So we can encourage that by displaying their artwork here. Connecting walking networks. So that's another big challenge. Upgrading materials. We have a lot of we have not really a lot of materials. So we need to be very careful about what materials we use. Reducing speed limits, I mentioned that multiple times. Green infrastructure, that's just a fancy way of saying trees. So another sort of thing about urban design that I noticed is really also, we're not just like designing for the sake of like the people, but we also need to market towards like the government or private companies so we can get these projects funded and sort of built. So how we use words is also very important. That's why I like to give you guys essays. Maybe in the midterms, you also need an essay, but we'll still discuss on that. And then it's just simple change of words. So it's saying, instead of saying like we need more trees, we can say we need more green infrastructure. So it sounds more professional. It sounds more important. Where really it's just a marketing strategy to get better urban design done. On the flip side, this can also be used to create bad urban design. So it's really more of a double-edged sword, but like that's what's happening today. Okay, providing street furniture, garbage cans, water fountains, information signs, wayfinding, and finally activate ground floor. So provide some kind of like interest for people walking along the street. and not just like closed off doors. I think that's already happening in the Philippines. So these are just a list of things that you could sort of introduce to your practice or your local community if you ever get the chance to join a team or like really pursue like practicing urban design in your area or maybe even abroad. So this whole process takes into account the users and the site context to create street design. Whereas before there was really no hard and fast rule, but with these guides coming out like from 2013 onwards, we can achieve desired outcomes like health and safety, livability and quality of life, multimodal access, environmental sustainability, etc., etc. So it's really more like applying what we learned in architecture to the public space. Okay, what time is it? It's 7:24. I think I can like go through a few more slides. So sort of the last sort of public space we'll talk about today. I skipped waterfronts because waterfronts are basically streets, but with water next to them. So you still apply the same standards. One more element of like urban design I want to talk about is the plaza or public square. So these are usually located kind of near urban buildings, and the function of them is really to highlight the important spaces in our cities, to create landmarks and to make those landmarks more visible and more memorable to, the general public. So over here on the right, I have an image of Cebu City's Fuente Osmeña Circle. It's one small patch of green in like a very kind of, not really dense, but a very kind of populated city. And this is something that we should not do. So I'll just show you what are the do's and don'ts of plazas. So again, we talked about like the sense of enclosure. So what does this mean? Sense of enclosure means that an area is framed on all four sides, like the bottom, the ceiling, and the walls. And you can create this sort of a frame by either using buildings, vegetations, or other sort of existing elements on the site. And then typically, older plazas or like the sort of the most memorable plazas are around 57 by 143 meters in dimension. So not that big, about 50 by 150 meters rectangle. And then in some smaller towns and cities, the plazas are like 15 to 21 meters in dimension. So these are very small, intimate spaces, like in terms of like public infrastructure. And if you make them too big, you lose that sense of human scale and you can't focus on anything. So as I mentioned before, the reason why that previous example of the Royal Opera House in Paris is bad is because the street is so long that the palace or the opera house is no longer visible at the end of the street. So we have to consider street length in street design. And in plaza design, we have to talk about plaza sort of dimension. So the ideal is about 50 by 150 or at least like 15 by 20. Anything larger than 150, like 200, 300, then it becomes difficult to focus on a clear design element, or either that design element has to be bigger. So here in the image on the left, we have St. Mark's Square. Again, this is in Italy. We have St. Mark's Cathedral over here. I think a prime example of, I think, what's after Renaissance, like Baroque architecture, somewhere around there. Was constructed during Renaissance time and then completed around like Baroque time. But the clear thing here is that the plaza is about 153 in length here on this longer side here. On the shorter side, about maybe 50. And there's like a second part of the plaza over here. So I'll go to 3D. Let's go to St. Mark's Cathedral. St. Mark's Square. And you can really see how it looks like St. Mark's Square was carved out from the city. So you can see the city is pretty solid. Like you see all the roofs. And then you carve out a space for people to gather. And it creates this sense of enclosure. So again, sense of enclosure is that all four sides of the space are sort of quote unquote enclosed or framed by either buildings. You see here buildings on the left and the right. Of course, the floor on the ground. And if you have a uniform sort of height for buildings, it creates this sort of uh, ceiling effects. So if more or less they're the same height, you create that kind of frame over there. So that's what I mean by enclosure, where everything is framed and you have this sort of picturesque output or design. The tower here is a sort of unique element to St. Peter's Plaza. Let me just erase that. Not St. Peter, St. Mark's Plaza. And it just creates this very memorable, very unique sort of space. I don't think you'll see this anywhere else. Maybe in Italy, but this really a highlight of Italian sort of urban design. You have the piece of architecture here, a very important piece at St. Mark's Cathedral, but it also kind of fades into the background, which makes this not really fades into the background, but it's part of the background, and it becomes sort of the main design element here is really the plaza and like the people moving around it. You can see similar architectural styles, and usually not in successful plazas, buildings have the same style, the same or similar building height and similar style. Not exactly the same, just similar. Regulated, I mean. Okay, so that's St. Mark's Cathedral. Let's go to St. Peter's Square. And if you notice, all of these examples are in Italy, mostly because most of the writing and studies about urban design were really done by Italian architects. You have Andrea Palladio, you have, what do you call this? In my notes here, I have an architect name or an urban designer named Camillo Site. I'll send you this PowerPoint after this presentation. But really, we're focusing on Italian cities because this is where basically the practice of urban design was documented. So we're starting here. And I think all of us will agree that these places are very visually appealing, very memorable. But if you think they're ugly, please let me know so we can discuss. So this is a boulevard going towards St. Peter's Cathedral. Motin, or the author of Urban Design Street and Square, would argue that it's too long because of the proportion of the street, it kind of dwarfs the cathedral. But some of my students would say it's fine because you get all this sidewalk space, and there's still sort of this drama of walking or driving towards St. Peter's Square. The closer you are, the street length issue is not so much a problem because the closer you get, the bigger the cathedral appears to be. So that's just perspective, actual perspective working. But when we get to the square, this was the original intent of, I think it was Bernini who designed the square. This is how, what do you call this? The cathedral is supposed to be seen. The cathedral is supposed to be the tallest structure in the vicinity, and then the plaza is here to enhance that. So I'm sure you've heard about how the St. Peter's Square or St. Peter's Plaza creates this sort of open arms na design, basically inviting people to come in. And then in the middle, you have this obelisk. But even then, even the obelisk is not as tall as the highest point of St. Peter's Cathedral. So as urban designers, our role is really to highlight what's existing and to make sure that we preserve important buildings, heritage buildings, as we design sort of new spaces. Okay. And then finally, we have Central Park. So parks are areas with a lot of vegetation. They're very different from plazas because plazas are more gathering space for people, and they don't put a lot of vegetation, mostly because they want to highlight the existing structures. If they put trees in St. Peter's Square, I don't think the Italians would be happy because then you'll be blocking the building, which is the culmination of decades of effort of design. So in parks, usually they don't highlight specific buildings, rather they're a different space altogether. And as I mentioned before, it's a space where people can get away from the city and relax. And this is very evident in one of the more famous parks here in New York, where the length of the park is about 4 kilometers. And that's like 4 times, 4 times, or maybe kanang way larger than any of the plazas in Italy. And these are sort of the ideal sizes for plazas. So parks are not the same as plazas. So just wanted to highlight that. And then next week, we'll discuss more on different terms here in plazas. I'm feeling really hungry. I want to break a bit for a snack. And then we'll come back maybe in 5 minutes, just break lang the 5 minutes. And then I'll discuss the kaning Urban Transportation Summit, or like Urban Mobility Summit in Cebu. So you'll have some idea as to like the current issues of transportation in the Philippines. Okay, so I think I'll just, if you'll excuse me, I'll take a quick break. Okay, medyo gutom. I'll get something to eat. I'll stop recording and we'll continue again